This is a complete video about the present tense in Spanish, and it is quite complex, so at any point you may pause the video or even rewind it to understand it. Let's start with the present tense of regular verbs. There are three groups of verbs, regular verbs in Spanish: the AR verbs, the ER verbs, and the IR verbs. Let's start with the AR verbs like hablar. As you can see, we remove the AR at the end of hablar and we add the endings of AR verbs in the present tense for each person. On the left-hand side, yo, tu, etc., etc. It's easy. You take any AR verb you know and you apply the ends in red to match the person you refer to as the subject in the sentence. Now, that was a long sentence. You may pause the video to understand what is meant here and observe. Now, if the subject is the person, an animal or a thing, the verb is conjugated in the same way as él, ella. Instead, look at these examples. Yo canto is me, I sing una canción. But Pedro is another person, a third person. Pedro canta una canción. Canta is conjugated exactly like él, ella, or usted. Él canta una canción. You can pause the video to read these examples to understand better. And of course, you can rewind the video too. Now, let's look at the ER, the IR verbs. If you look at these examples here at this table, you will see that they are very similar in the way they are conjugated, except for the nosotros, the vosotros forms. Observe and notice that comer will keep the I, comemos, coméis, whilst vivir will keep the I, vivimos, vivis. Here are a few ER verbs. And here are a few IR verbs. Again, feel free to pause the video to observe, maybe make notes even. Now, let's look at stem changing verbs, a different kind of verbs. In Spanish, yes, we have stem changing verbs. The stem, like in the flower, is the part of a verb that contains the underlying meaning of the verb. It's essential. Without the stem, there is no life. So, to identify the stem, we simply remove the verb's ending and from in the infinitive, which is the infinitive is the original form. Okay, let's look at these examples. Okay, so the infinitive would be cocinar, the stem would be cocin, the ending would be ar. Beber, beb, er. Vivir, viv, ir. Now, stem changing verbs in Spanish are a group of verbs that resemble regular verbs, but they require you to replace a letter in the stem when they are conjugated. For example, querer means to want, becomes quiero for I want. Soñar, sueño. Repetir, repito. You see, in Spanish, there are 5 types of stem changing verbs, and you will forget them, but with practice, you will remember them. There's this type which from A becomes ye, O becomes we, e, I, u, ue, I, ye. These changes apply only with jo, tu, and the third person singular and plural. 5 different kinds of stem changing verbs. And here are some examples. Querer means to want, becomes yo quiero, tú quieres, él, ella, usted quiere, nosotros queremos, vosotros queréis, ellos, ellas, ustedes quieren. Poder, puedo, puedes, puede, podemos, podéis, pueden, means can. Pedir means ask. Jugar means play. Adquirir means acquire. You can pause the video even if you want to write these, but that may be too much for at this stage. For now, just observe. Now, let's look at the present tense of irregular verbs. There are a few of them, and they are the most common verbs, so you need to remember them in 2 ways. One, by learning them by heart, but that's not the most efficient way. The second part is by practicing them. As you can see on the left-hand side in grid, we've got the persons, the people we're talking about, and then the verbs. So, ser means to be. If you want to say I am, you say yo soy, tú eres, él, ella, usted es, and so on. Estar also means to be. Do you remember the difference between ser and estar? Ser talks about permanent states. Estar talks about temporary states, right? And look at the conjugation. Tener, I have. Tengo, you have. Tienes, he has. Tiene, and so on, and so on. Hacer means to do or to make. Hago. Mis deberes, I do my homework. Poner is to put. Decir is to say. Ir. Go, ver, to see. Dar, to give. Saber, to know. Oír, to hear. And venir, to come. So these are very important verbs, and we're going to use them a lot. Now, one last word about irregular verbs and about verbs in general. The only way and the only tip you can get to remember irregular verbs and verbs in general is to use them regularly. But you can also look for patterns. For example, take these two verbs, ir and estar. They have similar endings. For example, estar becomes yo estoy, but ir means to go, yo voy. You are, tú estás. You go, tú vas. He is, él está. He goes, él va. You see the endings are quite similar. We are, nosotros estamos. We go, nosotros vamos. Vosotros estáis, vosotros vais, ellos están, ellos van. You see, these are patterns that will help you remember, especially irregular verbs.